Hey, this is Waylon from Swiftwood Bows. Welcome to part 3 of my board bow building project. And we've already got the bow laid out on our nice hickory board here. And the next step is going to be roughing it out to the width dimensions. So that means that we need to take off all this extra material here that's outside of our lines. There's a few ways that we can approach this. A hatchet can be a good tool for bulk wood removal. Draw knives are pretty aggressive and work pretty well. If you have access to something like a bandsaw, it would make short work of this. You could get this cut down very close to those lines and be ready to move on to the next step if that's what you have and that's what you like working with. I'm not going to use my power tools on this project because I know a lot of people don't have access to them, so I'm just going to be doing this with a draw knife. So let's get set up. I like to start out at the end of my bow and work my way up. That way, if the draw knife catches the grain and wants to tear, that I won't risk tearing down past my line into the bow. I'm just going to keep an eye on this line here, and I'm going to stay above it, and I'm not going to go all the way down to the line with the draw knife. I'll get fairly close, and then I'll clean it up with farrier's rasp, which gives me more control. So this draw knife is designed to use flat side up. The bevel side goes down. It depends on how the blade is angled. There are some draw knives that work better the other way, but this is one that's designed to work this way. So I'm just going to start ripping this wood off and working my way down to the line. So with draw knives, it would be a lot more effective if you take off corners, and then I'm going to leave myself a little hump there in the middle, which I'll be able to take off, and I'll just keep doing that, working the corners, taking off the hump. And it'll be a lot more efficient than just trying to work on that flat plane the whole time. So as you can see, I didn't get all the way down directly to the line with the draw knife yet. The draw knife can be a bit unpredictable. Sometimes it can grab chunks or tear into the grain a little bit, so it can be risky to get all the way down to the line. But the farrier's rasp is a great tool for doing that. So I'm going to reduce all 4 of the other sides in the handle section here. I'm not gonna dig down into here quite yet. I'll just kind of come straight across for now. We'll work down in there with some rasps. So let me work on these other edges, and then we'll do it with the rasp. Now that I've got it roughed out with the draw knife on all 4 sides, I'm going to clean this up and get it right down to my line with the farrier's rasp here. So the farrier's rasp has an aggressive side and a fine side. I'm going to start with the aggressive side and then just clean it up with the fine side. I don't want to make my line disappear because I'll lose my frame of reference. So I'll get it down right next to it, but I won't make my line go away. And I also want to make sure that the sides of the bow stay perpendicular to the back and the belly. I don't want it to slant away in either direction, so just be mindful of that. Okay, I've got my side rasps down right to the line. I'm going to do that on all 4 sides, and then we're going to take this wood out here next to the handle. I've got it reduced down to my lines on all 4 sides here. The only thing that's left for roughing out the width profile is this section here by the handle, and I just wanted to leave this for last just so I could make a point about it. You have to be careful when you're using a draw knife in an area like this because it's really easy to catch the grain and tear into the width of your limb when you're trying to work this space out. There are ways for getting in there more safely with a draw knife, but I think that the best thing to do is just to go at it with a rasp, even if it's going to take a little bit longer, because it's just the safe way to go. So for this middle section here, I can use the more aggressive farrier's rasp, And then to ease this contour in here a little bit more without gouging it up with the edges of the rasp, I'll use this rounded microplane. So I've got the width dimensions completely roughed out, including the handle section here. The next step that I'd like to do is to add a riser block. Now I want to say a few things about riser blocks and handles that I think are important to know when you're making a decision about how you want to do your handle. We're putting a riser block on here to make the handle more comfortable. Gluing a riser block on here is not going to stiffen up a bending section of the bow to make it non-bending. If this area of the bow is flexing at all, then it doesn't matter how good of a glue you use, it's likely that your riser block is going to pop off. And so we could, especially with this true inch thick board here, I could make this bow without putting a riser block on here. It would just mean that the handle would be fairly small, and for some people not so comfortable. So the most important thing for adding a riser block is to be confident that the area that the riser block is covering is not bending at all, because if it is, it's going to start to lift off and possibly completely pop off. So I have this pretty piece of Pacific Yew here that I'm going to use for my riser block. You can use really any kind of wood. I mean, it could be an end section that you cut off of the same board. It could be a nice accent piece like walnut or something like that. This is just something I had happen to be laying around my shop, and I thought it would make a nice handle, so that's what I'm going to use. Aside from not having the handle bending at all, the other important part of having a secure riser is to have a really good mating surface. So we're going to assume that this board is nice and flat and straight. If your board doesn't seem like that for some reason, you're going to have to correct that and make it flat. But I'm feeling pretty good about the way this is. I put this down on my belt sander to make it perfectly smooth. If you don't have a belt sander, you can get some sandpaper with an adhesive side, put it down on a flat surface like your workbench, and then you can rub it back and forth and get the same effect. But this has to be flat, and this has to be flat, and they have to be able to mate perfectly. I'm going to be using some Titebond 3, which is modern PVA wood glue for this purpose. It's perfectly suitable. There are other options like epoxy, not your 5-minute epoxy from your local hardware store, but a good quality epoxy like Smooth On EA40 or something like that. But for this purpose, I think the Titebond 3 is going to work just fine. I'm going to take some 80 grit here and just clean this up a little bit, make sure there's not any residual grease on it. You don't want to score up the surface. Titebond likes to have a real smooth, flat, perfect mating surface. It does not fill gaps well. So you can get down and try to see if there's any light coming through. If there is, then you need to get things flatter. So this block is 6 inches long. If you remember, our handle is 4 inches, so it's going to be sticking an inch past on either side of the handle. If you have it going out too far, out into the ends of your fades, then you're going to be risking having it get into a bending section of wood and start to lift at the ends. So I'm being fairly conservative, and I'm just going to measure here. So here's my 4-inch handle, and then my block will go 1 inch to either side. So I'm just going to make a little mark here just to make sure that it's symmetrical. can be fairly generous with the glue. If some squeezes out, that's okay. We don't want to starve the glue joint though. I'm going to grab some clamps, double check that it's all lined up here with my marks. You want to clamp it snugly. You don't want to over clamp it, but it should be fairly tight. Okay. I'm going to clean up the drips and I'm going to set this aside for 24 hours just to give the glue a chance to totally set and cure. So the riser block sat clamped up and glued overnight. It's about the same time the next day that I glued it. So now we're going to kind of get a basic shape for this riser block. Just kind of want to show you what it looks like at this stage here. Good glue line. I don't see any gaps. Should work just fine. First thing I'm going to do here is just use my microplane and even this edge up here. Got the side of the handle smoothed out here. My next step is going to be able to lay out the basic shape of the handle here. So this is a place where people often make a mistake. What's really important here is that we're creating a really smooth, gradual transition from our bulky handle to our working limb. If we have a really abrupt transition here, it can concentrate a lot of force. This area in the middle of the bow, even though it doesn't move a lot when we bend the bow, there's a lot of force being concentrated in this area, and we don't want it to be focused on any one particular spot, and that's what happens when we have an abrupt transition. So what I've done here is I measured, here's my handle, 4 inches, right? An inch to either side with my riser. I'm not going to use the whole height of this, so I just picked an arbitrary line here for about how much thickness I'd like to add to my bow. I don't want a lot, just enough to make a comfortable handle. I'm not making a super tall riser on this bow. The next step is going to be to give myself a guide for my smooth transition here. Now, if you feel confident about it, you could just eyeball it, but if you want to have a guide, you take something like this bowl here that has a smooth radius, and you just kind of line it up with this top corner of where I want my official handle to start, and then just kind of pick a reasonable spot down here so that I'm not taking away too much thickness from my fade area, but I can still get a nice smooth line here. Let me do the same thing on the other side. So the rest of this up here is going to get removed. So you can choose what method you'd like to remove this extra bulk. If you've got a belt sander and you feel confident with it, that might be a good way to do it. I'm going to use some rasps to take it down. It's a little bit more time consuming, but it's safe and effective. I watched a video from Clay Hayes where he uses a sharp chisel and kind of cuts in right here and scoops this out. He did it quite effectively. That might be something to look up on YouTube and check out how he did it if you're interested. But I'm just going to use a rasp for mine. Wanted to show you here where I left off with the riser block. So I've got it smoothed down. I've got even slopes here on either side. It's not perfect in terms of appearance yet. I'm just kind of getting the basic shape. We're going to be coming down into the hickory here to create more of a fade once we start the tillering process, so it's not going to look quite so tacked on like it does right now. It's going to flow more with the rest of the board. But we just wanted to get it in the right place. We wanted to give it the right basic shape and get that transition starting appropriately. So we've got our bow all roughed out. We've got our riser block on. So the next video, we're going to start with the tillering process. Thanks for watching. I hope you're enjoying the series so far. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to answer them the best that I can. So good luck with your projects and stay tuned for the next video in the series. Thanks.